Hi, everybody, and welcome to our podcast today. My name is John Colucci. I'm Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Westchester Modular Homes, located in Wingdale, New York. I'm here today with Joe Enright, who is owner of Westchester Modular Homes of Fairfield County, one of our model home builders who services the southwestern part of Connecticut and also has a satellite office up in the major metropolitan area of Boston and servicing Cape Cod. And I'm also here with Dave Dillman, who is sales manager for Joe out of his operation. Guys, welcome. Glad to have you here today.
Thanks, John.
And one of the things that we wanted to focus on today, we're coming off of a great webinar. By the way,
Excellent.
If you'd like to join one of our webinars, we do them virtual webinar every 2 weeks. You could go to westchestermodular.com and sign up for that webinar at any time. And the reason why we're having this topic today about financing is we had a terrific webinar last night. There were a lot of questions about financing. So today we decided to have a special guest, Tom Coronato from Citizens Bank. Tom is one of their specialists in modular construction and modular lending. So Tom, welcome to the call. Welcome to the podcast. We're sorry that you can't be here in the big metropolis of Bethel, Connecticut,
Yep.
but we're glad to have you on the phone. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Tom, what comes up on these calls quite often, or on the webinars rather quite often, is customers. What we try to achieve rather on the webinars is we want to explain to people what the process is. What does that look like? Because listen, we all know building a home could be daunting, right? It could be a daunting. So we try to give people a starting point. Where do they really begin? And we talk about land, we talk about financing. So what do you tell a client that calls you and they ask about financing for a home? What direction do you steer them, especially with the volatility in the rates? And we all know the rates have just gone up. And so what suggestions? How do you start out with a client?
Well, each one of these are going to be different. We try to corral the folks into some of the generic, paths. One of the paths that, typically we see is, have they talked to a lender? And if not, can they just do the mathematics? So I usually will start with where do they think their budget is? And then asking the secondary question of not only where do they think the budget's going to be, but then where do they want to be on monthly payment? Because 90% of the game is actually monthly payment. So, math and budget equals monthly payment. And on the rate side, where a year ago we were quoting in the 2s and 3s, the good news, 2 months ago we were quoting near 7, but today you're down in the high 4s, low 5s, depending on program, and definitely in the 6 range. And again, it changes every day, but that, although it's not free, it's not the doom and gloom that's being posted out there, because the markets are starting to react with the slowdown and the inflationary indicators. So we usually start with the math and say, okay, what is your monthly payment goal? And then work it backwards, because then we'll start going through whether or not they're doing a new construction loan, a build and tear down, or an odd lot rebuild. Could be anything to even a regular purchase. It's just first a math game of what do they qualify? And even if they're confident, let's look at credit. Let's make sure there's no credit surprises. Things tend to end up on credit. People that they may monitor it, but they might be only looking at one credit score, not seeing all three. So that this way, the bank, whatever bank, kind of blesses it first, kind of powders them on the butt, sends them back to the builder and says, yeah, if your budget is $700,000 or $1 million or $500,000, that the payment is where they're expecting it. Now let's kind of find a house that matches that budget, so that they're not, designing a home and then all of a sudden finding that they're redesigning to fit their budget. And again, as rates decline, that's the good news. If rates go up, that was the bad news for the last several months. People designed the house, they spent all the time to find out that they can't afford it.
Hey, to circle back, Tom, it just kind of dawned on me, because Dave and myself and his team talked to a lot of clients, and being more educated on, where the rates are day to day and talking where it's gone. And that's pretty interesting, just to the beginning conversation, you were saying where it was, where we are now, and the more we talk and can educate people like we're doing today, I think it's very helpful, because I think a lot of our clients are fearful. Well, I can't build now because interest rates are too much. So obviously, we work on things like this, and that's very helpful, and obviously the process too.
And Tom, one of the other questions that I had is if Mr. and Mrs. Smith are looking at a lot at 1 Elm Street, do you generally do a one-shot close where you're financing the land as well as the home, or do they have to take out multiple loans to get that done?
Well, typically it's a single close loan for lot acquisition and for the building and all of its components. So that would cover everything. Again, the typical conversation a client may have with me, depending if it's a turnkey from the builder or if they're trying to use a cousin for the septic tank. How do they have to do that? Like, there's a lot of different things that kind of come into play, but it's usually a single close that encompasses land and house build. If they did want to do, if they had financing on the land or they own the land, that's fine. Again, a common question I get is, I own the land, it's worth $100,000. How much down payment do I need? Well, if they're bringing the land to the table, oftentimes they don't need a down payment because the land acts as an equity position, right, again, provided it appraises. But those are kind of the things that, we kind of focus the folks in, because they just assume they need to bring additional funds. Now they can, but they don't have to. The lot will act as a down payment position. But 99% of the calls that I get, even if they've talked to other lenders or bankers or whomever, is they don't realize how important the appraisal is as a key piece of the entire lending arena.
Right.
So I kind of get them back focused to, well, where's your lot? What's its location? What's its size? Is it a rural setting? Is it an urban setting? What is selling in the area? So that this way they have a proper expectation for like a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. Because, again, if you're building something for $1 million and appraises for $2 million, great, let's do that every day. But if it's building it for $1 million and appraises for 500, let's pump the brakes. Let's take a look at what you're doing, and let's rethink this. Because we'll still lend, but we may not lend as much as they think. So
yeah. Right. So there's processes. There's steps to your process, just like there's steps in our process. Like the beginning part, like you said, qualifying. Figuring out where you are, what you want to spend, the payment, that you want to be at, or number, or loan amount, or whatever it is. And then it goes to the next step that Dave and myself can talk about equally as you can. And you mentioned it a little bit. It's appraisals and stuff like that. So in order for you to take your next step from a builder like myself and Dave, you're going to need plans and specs and all those things to do an appraisal, correct?
Yes. So typically in the pre-approval process, what we're going to do is just the mathematic gymnastics. And that's really just the client doing the math of a mortgage. Then I actually, again, send them back to the builder relationship and say, okay, can you build what you want for the budget? And that usually ends up with a couple conversations with me, because then they come back to me and say, okay, the budget's where I want to be, the payment's where I want to be, what's next? And then that's where we want a fully executed contract at that point. So the pre-approval, I don't need that, but for it to go live, meaning an actual active application, trying to close within 30 days, would be a fully executed contract with deposits to the builder, so that this way they secure the contract, and each builder will have a different amount that they require. And then that would also allow for us to get the plans, architectural drawings, dimensions, because that's going to go to the appraiser immediately, who's then going to give us an after improved value of what that house is worth once it's on the lot. So
that's terrific.
Hopefully that answers that. So.
It does. And I think, what you're really saying is the pre-approval process is really setting the stage for the rest of the process from, hey, listen, let's first find out what your budget is. What can you afford? You're backing into some number. So Tom would do that with the customer. And then once they understand it, as Tom said, you don't want to start designing something before you understand what you can afford on a monthly basis. Exactly. So the pre-approval really sets the stage for the design. Mm-hmm. So that's awesome.
It does. And there's some, consultation in there where, today, so a year ago at 3%, we never recommended an adjustable rate. Well, today adjustable rates are back in play because when rates were at 7 and you could get a 10-year ARM at 5, that's a huge difference in monthly payment. And once we kind of go through that, because you kind of marry the house and you date the rate, as we all know, because we all have gray hair, or at least I assume everyone on the phone does.
Some have none.
Dave doesn't have any gray hair.
Well, mine is gray, so I've seen rates, as high as 10, as low as 3. And we know that we go through refi boom. So if they're comfortable with the payment or they feel that, rates are going to come down, the recommendation is an ARM has been very popular because like a 10-year ARM is locked for the next 10 years, and there's a good indicator that rates could possibly come down. But if we look at historically just in the last year, a lot of clients a year and a half ago were hesitating because, let's say, prices were out of control in their mind. And just had a $10,000 or $20,000 increase in lumber, well, they waited. And they were waiting for lumber prices to come down. But guess what happened? Rates went from 3 to 6, and that $20,000 more they would have paid in lumber turned out to be $200,000 in lending that they lost in buying power,
Right.
plus another $200,000 in cost of the mortgage over time. So there's a lot of things to kind of throw at people to say, okay, while you're making this decision, $10,000 is only $60 a month, as opposed to a rate movement that might cost you $600 a month.
Right. So let me ask you another question. One of the things, Tom, that I'm coming across more and more these days is co-generational housing. And I have families where parents are living with their children are living with the parents, and we're starting to do more projects in that vein as well. How do you handle that typically from a lending perspective?
Well, it depends on, again, as you know, the industry age in place and things of that nature. The co-generation, I think, is kind of where we do need to go. So you look at mother-daughter. Is it a mother-daughter? Is it a duplex? And how does that all kind of play out? Again, it comes down to the appraiser. In certain areas of the country where it's very common, it's easier for the appraiser to do a more complex appraisal that has, say, kind of 2, living units. And again, if it's under one roof or say an ADU or something like that. But in areas that are a little more rural, the appraiser needs to have a little more comment on the appraisal to make sure that it's not affecting marketability, which in today's world, I don't know that I see too often that we ever have a marketability issue. But it's not uncommon, and it is a trend that we see in the industry.
So to follow up on that, because I did a couple houses where parents have gone on the mortgage, though. So do you ultimately add, I can think of 2 deals off the top of my head. Do you ultimately add the parents on, or you don't have to, or every job's different, obviously, but just curious. So do you do that standard practice? You do add people to help, or not typically?
So, all right. I mean, you get down and dirty into it, but my world becomes more conversational as far as like how do you handle their estate, because a lot of it is I have to ask the questions. And I might be different than another loan officer.
Yeah.
But I'm going to get into the conversation of how is the estate plan. But do you want mom or dad on it? We need mom or dad on it. Who's on the deed? Who's not on the deed? When do we add them to the deed?
Mm-hmm.
But then talk about the repercussions of who, because really at the end of the day, we all know that mom and dad, or us in this case, somebody's going to pass before another person.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're usually concerned about that. So I address that in the conversation to how do we structure it. And then I look at the mathematics again. Do you need the kids on? Do you need the dad on? Sometimes the parents don't want to be on it. They just want to, give the equity and the money. So you kind of, that's where we kind of tailor it for each person.
Good. So. Yeah. And it's reality. We definitely deal with this. So it's an open conversation for somebody that's out there looking to build with their parents. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely a good thing to think about. So I had one last question. As far as reserves, you're building a house. Me and John had our podcast last night, and we talked about unforeseens, getting into the ground and stuff like that. Do you kind of have a typical formula for reserves for somebody that's building a house?
It kind of changes with each transaction and the comfort of the client. It also goes with equity position. Again, if it's a tight equity position, maybe we can't build the reserves in. If it's, if they have a low loan to value, like 60 or 70%, we may recommend building in 10%. Yep. Generally, as a rule, most lenders will put some kind of overlay that will say, like, we'll close the loan provided they have X amount of dollars in reserve. And it may not be something the bank wants, but they're going to want to see a 401k or, some kind of stock or bond. But the usual, I'd rather bake it into the loan, because in our world, a lot of times I could borrow $900,000 if they need $800 in the end. We just modify the payment at the end. And it gives a $100,000 miscellaneous slush for cost overruns. I mean, they probably would never use that much, but you never know. So.
Yeah, and the reason why I ask, because if you are building with younger family or something like that, it's something to talk about, because as a builder, there's things that we can't control. We do the best we can. We talk about it, but we don't want to ever get somebody in a situation where, oh my gosh, we're 20,000 short. So I figured there had to be some kind of contingency through the bank.
Yeah, there is. The worst is there is no, we've bled it as far as we can. Then we have to get creative on the loan as an exit. So when I say exit, if you're finishing up the house, a certificate of occupancy is issued. We're not closing again because we have a closed loan. But you might look at saying, okay, like if all parties agree, can you get a small home equity line of credit later on, now that the house is got a CO and is occupied, and maybe reimburse. So we do have those conversations with folks. Not frequent, but you kind of have to have a plan A, a B, and a C. So
yeah, we got to talk about it all. Yep. Sure. All right.
Sounds good. One quick thing, Tom, and then we'll let you go. On the webinar, sometimes customers will ask, well, is there a big difference between a construction and permanent loan for a modular home versus, they call them, regular homes?
Right. I mean, there is technically no difference. Modular is just the way that the house is built. You guys know all the nuances there. The appraiser, I think they confuse modular just because they hear factory built with double wide, which would have a difference as a depreciation asset. But modular, no. It's just, again, we're kind of pioneers in the industry, where you look at a site-built house, they use modular components. It's just that modular is using those components, same components in a factory, and delivering it to the site. So technically, no. The big difference really comes down to the manufacturer and the payment schedule, but that's something that we hash out and deal with as a lender with the builder, because, again, the most important thing in the world is that everyone's being paid on time. It keeps a happy project going.
Super.
Yeah, the big difference is there's less time in the modular. So the loan is not out there as long.
And I used to use it.
We can spend a lot of time on the advantages of modular.
Yeah,
exactly.
But that's one thing we'll put a little period on for sure.
The bottom line really here is that the important part about this process and starting out, the advice to a customer, where do we begin? We begin with getting pre-qualified from the bank and set the stage for the budget. That sets the stage for the design and the rest of the process that we'll talk about in another phase of our podcast. So, Tom, we very much appreciate you joining us. We are absolutely going to, we'd love to put your number up on the screen right now, so anybody that's watching this that has an interest in speaking with you about pre-qualification or speaking to you further about financing, we'll have them give you a call.
Yeah, happy to help out. Appreciate you guys having me as a guest and sharing your knowledge and allowing me to share mine. So,
excellent.
Thank you,
Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Sure thing.
All right. Bye-bye.